The wind had a mean edge that night, scraping across the plains like a blade on bone. Elias sat on his porch, boots planted in the dust, watching lightning dance miles away over the Black Ridge. He wasn't expecting visitors. Not out here, not after sundown. Yet the shape moving through the storm wasn't the kind of thing a man could ignore. She stumbled from the darkness, coat torn, one hand pressed to her shoulder. Blood glimmered when the lightning cracked again. Elias stood, hand hovering near the rifle by the door. She called out once, a voice raw, desperate, carrying more fear than breath, then dropped to her knees in the mud. Why would a woman be running through the desert at this hour? And why did she carry a soldier's satchel stamped with a mark the government buried years ago? Elias hesitated only a second before stepping forward. He'd made mistakes before, but leaving someone to die in his dirt wasn't one he could live with again. Rain drummed against the barn roof all night, steady as a heartbeat. Elias sat near the lantern, his rifle propped close, watching the stranger breathe unevenly beneath his old coat. Her satchel lay nearby, army canvas, stamped with a faded eagle and a serial he hadn't seen since the war. When he unbuckled the flap, something heavy shifted inside. A rusted revolver, blood-crusted papers, and a single brass insignia marked U.S. Cavalry. 7th. His chest tight. That unit was gone, wiped out years ago near the Rio Brazos. He'd ridden with them once. He shut the satchel fast, as if afraid the past might crawl out. She stirred in her sleep, whispering a name he didn't recognize. Outside, the storm eased, leaving only the sound of dripping eaves and a far-off coyote cry. Elias wondered if the devil himself had sent her here, or if fate just had a cruel sense of humor. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and cold. Elias stepped outside, boots squelching in wet dirt, scanning the horizon for tracks. The sun crept up blood-red, slicing through low mist. Near the fence line, he found hoofprints, fresh, heavy, too many to count. Riders had been near during the night. He turned back toward the barn, unease tightening his gut. The woman was sitting upright now, clutching her shoulder, eyes wary but awake. She asked where she was, her voice hoarse like gravel. Elias didn't answer right away. He poured water into a tin cup, handed it to her, and waited. She drank slow, never looking away. When she finally spoke again, her words chilled him. "They'll come before noon," she said, "and they want to ask nicely." The morning carried a silence that felt like waiting. Elias split wood by the shed, each strike echoing through the emptiness. He couldn't shake the woman's words. Inside, she'd cleaned her wound, moved slow but sure, like someone used to pain. When he brought her coffee, she asked if he'd fought in the war. He said once, long ago, and left it at that. She studied him then, eyes narrowing, something like recognition flickering before she looked away. The smell of wet soil mixed with smoke as he noticed a distant dust trail rising beyond the ridge. A column of riders, maybe 20. His pulse quickened. He glanced toward the barn, saw her staring at the same horizon. No words passed between them, but both knew what it meant. Trouble was riding fast. The first gunmetal glint appeared just before noon. Through his spyglass, Elias counted the riders. Cavalry formation, U.S. Army, no doubt about it. His stomach turned cold. They spread out, surrounding the property with practiced precision, flags snapping in the dry wind. A voice rang out from the main road, commanding it sharp, ordering Elias to step forward. Clara stood beside him now, face pale, trembling not from fear but fury. "They're not here for me," she muttered. "They're here for what I took from them." Elias glanced at her, searching her eyes for truth, but found only fire. The voice shouted again, demanding surrender. Elias felt the weight of his rifle, the same one he'd promised never to raise again. The wind died, leaving silence so heavy it hurt. Then he said quietly, "You best tell me who you really are." The sun, high and merciless as the first shout, cracked across the yard. Captain Harlan's voice carried the weight of law, but Elias heard something darker beneath it. Guilt, maybe, or fear. The soldiers formed a ring, rifles raised, waiting for a reason to fire. Clara stood half-hidden behind the porch post, her face pale, her fingers trembling near the pistol she'd taken from the satchel. Elias could feel the years between this moment and the battlefield closing in, like time folding on itself. Harlan called out again, demanding the fugitive be released. Elias answered steady, telling him no one here was a prisoner. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then came Harlan's final warning, 5 minutes before they came in shooting. Elias looked to Clara. She gave a small nod. He didn't know if it meant trust or surrender. Maybe both. The 5 minutes stretched thin as wire. Elias moved slow, loading rounds into the rifle, the sound sharp against the still air. Clara whispered that she'd been part of a transport, a convoy carrying something the army wanted hidden. She never said what, only that men died to keep it secret. Harlan had led that mission, and she'd run when the killing started. Elias studied her face, wondering what kind of truth could make a soldier turn on her own. Outside, the horses shifted restlessly. One young private shouted, "Time's up!" and the tension snapped like a whip. Elias chambered around and stepped off the porch. The desert went silent, except for the creak of saddles and the slow pull of triggers. Gunfire shattered the silence. The first shots tore through the barn wall, splintering wood, filling the air with dust and hay. Elias ducked behind the trough, returning fire with measured calm. Clara scrambled toward the back, dragging the satchel with her. She moved faster than a wounded person should, her motions practiced, trained. Bullets sparked off the plow beside her. Elias shouted for her to stay down, but she was already at the rear door, pulling open the latch. Smoke drifted from the barn, swirling gold in the sunlight. Somewhere beyond the noise, Harlan's voice roared for a ceasefire, but his men had already decided how this day would end. When the firing finally stopped, the world seemed to exhale. Smoke curled over the yard, and a horse screamed somewhere beyond the corral. Elias stepped outside, rifle ready, his heart thudding slow but steady. Bodies lay in the dirt, 2 soldiers down, 1 moaning. Harlan's face was pale with fury as he rode closer, reins jerking hard. He demanded Clara be surrendered for court-martial. Elias met his gaze and said she'd already gone. Harlan didn't believe him. The captain dismounted, boots crunching in the gravel, eyes burning with old recognition. "You served under me once," he said quietly. "You know how this ends." Elias said nothing. He'd known it since the moment she knocked on his door. Elias knew the next words could damn them both. Harlan accused him of harboring a traitor, but his voice cracked when he said it, as if he already knew the truth was worse. Clara emerged from behind the barn, dirt-streaked, defiant, holding up the brass insignia from her satchel. "This," she said, "was my father's." Harlan's eyes widened, all color draining from his face. Elias watched realization crawl over him like sickness. The wind picked up again, rattling the porch chains. The standoff was no longer about orders or fugitives. It was about ghosts, and the sins buried under their boots. The wind died, but the memories came roaring. Harlan's stare held Elias like a nail to wood. "You were there," the captain said, voice hollow. "Brabazzo's crossing. You gave the order." Elias didn't answer. His silence told the story better than words ever could. Clara's gaze shifted between them, confusion twisting into horror. She demanded to know what Brabazzo's crossing was. Neither man spoke, yet the air seemed to whisper it for them. A massacre buried under sand and lies. The horses shifted nervously, as if feeling the weight of the past. Elias looked down, his jaw tight. He'd carried that guilt for 17 years, and now the daughter of the man he'd condemned stood before him. Elias's mind drifted to the war, the heat, the smell of burned grain and men screaming. Brazos Crossing hadn't been a battle. It was an execution. Orders came down from Harlan, cold and clean. Burn the village. Leave no witnesses. Elias remembered refusing at first, remembered the barrel of a superior's pistol pressed to his back. When the smoke cleared, the only survivor was a child hidden in a grain cart, a girl with eyes like copper. Now those same eyes stared back at him from Clara's face. His stomach turned to stone. The past wasn't buried. It had come home. Clara didn't cry. She just stood there, the wind tugging her hair across her face. "So you remember him?" she said, quietly. Elias nodded once. She stepped closer, the insignia still clutched in her fist. "He was my father," she said. "The man you called a traitor." The words struck like bullets, but Elias didn't move. Harlan took a slow breath, trying to speak, but guilt choked him silent. The truth now belonged to Clara. Elias saw it. That fire that would burn down everything he had left. He looked toward the sky, the color of tarnished brass, and whispered, "I tried to forget." Harlan tried to salvage authority, shouting for his men to reform the line, but the soldiers hesitated. They'd heard enough to know this wasn't a lawful hunt. Clara moved toward the barn, dragging the satchel with her. Elias followed, torn between guilt and duty. Inside, she tore it open and spilled the contents. A journal, maps, a folded letter burned around the edges. She said it was proof of what happened at Brazos Crossing, and that she'd risk everything to bring it into daylight. Elias stared at the pages, seeing his own name scrawled beside Harlan's in the report. Everything he'd buried had finally crawled back into the sun. Outside, the soldiers muttered among themselves. Even loyalty has its limits when the truth stinks of murder. Harlan stormed toward the barn, demanding the papers. Elias blocked his path, rifle aimed but voice calm. "You made us do it," he said. "You made us kill them." Harlan's hand went to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. For a long breath, neither man moved. Then Clara stepped out, holding the letter aloft. "This is signed by both of you," she said. "If I die, it doesn't disappear." The words hung in the dry air like judgment. Harlan looked at Elias one last time and walked away, ordering his men to burn the ranch if she didn't surrender by dusk. The sky dimmed to copper as soldiers poured kerosene along the dry grass. Elias watched from the porch, the barrel of his rifle glinting faintly in the dying light. Clara sat inside, binding her arm again, her face hard with decision. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp sting of fuel. Harlan stood at the head of the line, shouting orders, his voice cracking through the smoke. Elias could have fired, could have ended it before the match was struck. But something in him faltered. He'd spilled enough blood for one lifetime. Still, when the first flame caught and leapt like a wild beast toward the fence, he knew there'd be no turning back. The fire spread fast, snapping through the brittle grass, devouring the pastures that had been his life's work. The flames tore through the grasslands like vengeance itself. Elias ran to the corral, cutting loose the horses, slapping their flanks until they vanished into smoke. Clara stumbled out behind him, coughing, clutching the satchel to her chest. Sparks rained from the sky, settling on her torn coat like embers on ash. The sound was a low roar. Wind and fire and chaos merged into one voice. She shouted that the ravine to the west might still be clear. Elias nodded, his breath coming rough. "We go when it hits the fence," he said. For a heartbeat, they just stood there, watching the only home he'd ever known go up in orange light. It wasn't just fire eating the land. It was everything he'd tried to bury. Through the burning fields, Elias led Clara toward the ravine, every step sinking into ash and mud. Gunfire crackled behind them. Warning shots from Harlan's men, trying to herd them like cattle. The night sky turned red. Clouds lit from below as if the earth itself burned. Clara stumbled, clutching his arm for balance, and he pulled her up without a word. They moved as one. Survivor and sinner, bound by something deeper than trust. At the ridge's edge, Elias looked back once. The ranch was gone, only smoke and flame where his life had stood. He whispered something she couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse, and turned toward the dark canyon below. They reached the edge of the ravine where the air cooled and the noise softened to a low rumble. Clara leaned against a rock, coughing hard, blood spotting her sleeve again. Elias tore a strip from his shirt and bound it tight, his rough hands steady despite the shaking ground. Down below, water glimmered faintly, a narrow stream cutting through stone. "We can follow it west," he said. She nodded weakly. Above them, the fire roared on, reflected in her eyes like a living nightmare. "You couldn't have left me," she whispered. Elias didn't answer. The truth was, he'd thought about it, but guilt had longer roots than fear. Back at the burning ranch, Harlan watched the flames with clenched fists. His men stood restless, uncertain whether to pursue. One asked if they'd go after the fugitives. Harlan didn't answer right away. He could still see Elias's face in the smoke. Older, broken, but unbent. "They'll burn with the land," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. As the fire climbed higher, he took off his hat and pressed it to his chest, the heat reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, promising rain that might come too late. For the first time in years, Captain James Harlan looked afraid, not of death, but of the truth that would survive him. Darkness had settled thick across the ravine, the fire above painting the sky in bruised reds. Elias and Clara huddled near the stream, their breath misting in the cool air. The water was shallow, black as oil, carrying flecks of ash downstream. She pressed her satchel close, whispering that dawn would bring the army again. Elias said nothing, only fed a small flame with bits of driftwood. The silence between them was heavy, full of unspoken truths. Finally, she opened the satchel, pulling out a folded map stained by time and blood. She pointed to a series of marks, shallow graves drawn in neat rows. "They're under your land," she said. Elias froze. His ranch, his soil, had been their graveyard all along. The sound of the river seemed louder after that, louder than the silence between them. Clara told him her father had been a messenger, not a soldier, carrying proof of Harlan's war crimes when they caught him at Brazos Crossing. Elias's hands trembled as he listened. He remembered the orders, the screams, the way Harlan had said it was, for the Union's peace. He'd believed it once. Now he saw it for what it was. Murder, dressed in duty. Clara stared at him through the smoke. "You buried them," she said. He nodded slowly, unable to meet her eyes. "I thought if no one remembered, maybe I could forget." Her voice broke as she said, "Then you buried me too." Elias rose and walked toward the stream, the weight of memory pressing on his shoulders like armor he couldn't remove. Clara stayed by the fire, staring at the papers. The flames flickered against the words, names, numbers, reports, all of it damning. In the distance, thunder rumbled, echoing through the ravine like drums. Elias looked up at the storm rolling in, thinking of his wife, the quiet mornings that once felt like peace. He realized now they were just the calm before this reckoning. When he returned, Clara had tucked the papers away and sat with her back against the rock, eyes heavy but awake. "If we survive," she said, "I'll make the world read those names." Elias nodded. "Then I'll help you do it." Rain came hard, drumming on stone, soaking the earth until the fire hissed out. The smell of smoke and wet ash filled the ravine. Elias found a small alcove in the rock wall and guided Clara there, shielding her from the storm. They shared what warmth they could, pressed close beneath his coat. For a while, neither spoke. Then she asked if he'd ever tried to make it right. He said he spent his life trying not to remember. "That's not the same," she said softly. Lightning flashed, showing the pain etched into both their faces, one born of loss, the other of shame. The rain carried their silence away, mingling it with the ghosts of the past. The storm faded by dawn. Mist rose from the ravine, curling around them like breath. Elias stirred first, stiff and cold, while Clara sat tracing lines on the map with her finger. "We're close," she said quietly. "The graves are near the old Cottonwood Ridge." He looked at her, realization dawning. She hadn't come here by chance. She'd been following the trail to his doorstep all along. She met his gaze, no shame in her eyes, only purpose. "I needed you to see it," she said, "to remember what you did." Elias exhaled, slow, heavy. "And when I do," she closed the map and said, "then you'll help me finish it." By sunrise, the sky was the color of dried blood. Elias and Clara climbed from the ravine, clothes soaked, faces pale with exhaustion. Smoke still drifted from what had been the Mercer Ranch, curling into the clouds like a final prayer. They moved quietly, following the map's path through the blackened fields. When they reached the ridge, the earth changed, softer, sunken, uneven. Elias knelt, brushing away the soot until bone-white fragments showed beneath. Clara stood motionless, clutching the satchel to her chest. She didn't cry. The only sound was the wind whispering through burned grass. Elias bowed his head. "They deserved better," he said. "So did he," she replied. The weight of every unburied sin pressed down on them both. A distant bugle broke the silence. Both froze. On the horizon, figures appeared through the haze. Soldiers, dozens of them, riding slow and steady. Harlan was among them, his uniform stained with soot, his face grim and sleepless. "End of the road," he called. His voice carried like thunder rolling over stone. Clara lifted the satchel, holding it hot. "You burn this land," she shouted. "But you can't burn the truth." Harlan's hand rose, signaling his men to aim. Elias stepped in front of her, rifle raised, his stance steady as the ground beneath him. "You'll have to come through me," he said. Harlan rode closer, his voice calm but eyes wild. "You think anyone will believe her?" he asked. "They'll call her mad, and you a traitor." Elias didn't lower his gun. Clara shouted that the truth was written in his own hand. The orders, the massacre, every lie signed and sealed. For a moment, something in Harlan's face cracked, the soldier's mask slipping to reveal the frightened man beneath. Then he drew his pistol. "You don't understand," he said softly. "We were saving the country." Elias stepped forward, fury trembling in his voice. "No, you were saving yourselves." The first shot echoed like the crack of judgment. Harlan's bullet grazed Elias's arm. Elias fired back, hitting Harlan's horse, sending it crashing into the dirt. The soldiers erupted into chaos. Some fired, others hesitated. Clara ducked behind a fallen log, clutching the satchel as bullets tore the air. Elias dragged himself toward her, blood seeping through his sleeve. Gunfire thundered around them, the dust cloud turning red and gray. Then, through the haze, Harlan rose, staggering to his feet, gun still in hand. He limped toward the barn ruins where Clara was cornered, shouting her name over the storm of bullets. Elias tried to stand, but his strength was slipping fast. Inside what was left of the barn, the fight ended where it began. Harlan cornered Clara among the smoldering beams, gun trembling in his grasp. "Your father was a traitor," he said, voice cracked. She stepped closer, eyes burning through the smoke. "No," she whispered. "He was your conscience." The shot rang out, but it wasn't hers. Elias stood behind Harlan, rifle smoking, blood pouring from his arm. Harlan fell without a word, his pistol slipping from his grasp. Elias staggered, leaning on the wall. "It's over," he said, though his voice sounded like a prayer more than a truth. Clara caught him as he collapsed, both of them bathed in the flickering light of dying fire. When dawn finally broke, the fire was gone, leaving nothing but smoke and silence. Elias woke to the taste of blood in his mouth and the weight of Clara's arm around him. The barn's roof had collapsed in the night, but somehow they'd survived. Outside, the soldiers were gone. Only the wind remained, whispering through the broken posts. Clara stirred and looked at him, pale, exhausted, eyes red from tears. "He's gone," she said. Elias nodded weakly. "As was everything else." She helped him sit up, and for the first time in years, he let someone. The sun rose through the smoke, soft and gold, touching the ruins like mercy too late to matter. They buried Harlan beneath the cottonwood ridge where the fire hadn't reached. No prayers, no words, just the hollow scrape of Elias's shovel breaking the dirt. Clara stood nearby, silent. When it was done, she set the brass insignia on the grave, pressing it into the soil with trembling fingers. Elias leaned on the shovel, staring at the horizon where the army had vanished. He said, "Not for a while," she replied. The desert stretched empty, endless. For the first time, neither of them had anywhere left to run. By midday, the heat returned, baking the silence into the ground. Clara unfolded her father's letter one last time, the edges flaking to dust. She handed it to Elias. "He wrote this for the men who followed orders," she said. "Said they'd have to choose someday between the uniform and the truth." Elias read it slowly, lips barely moving. The handwriting shook, but the words didn't. Forgiveness written by a dying man. When he finished, he folded it again and gave it back. "Keep it," he said. "It's yours." She smiled faintly, a sad, tired thing. "It's yours too," she said. As the sun began to set, Elias saddled the last surviving horse. His hands shook, weak from blood loss, but he moved with quiet purpose. Clara tried to protest, but he only smiled faintly. "You said the world needs to know," he told her. "Then you'll take it there." He handed her the satchel, the journal, the maps, the letter, everything that remained. She looked at him, realizing what he meant. "You're not coming," she said. He shook his head. "I reckon this is as far as I go." The light faded to amber, painting his face in peace for the first time. Clara rode west as the last light faded. She didn't look back until the ridge disappeared behind her. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay towns, papers, men who'd need to answer for the dead. Behind her, the land grew still again. No ranch, no soldiers, just the desert reclaiming what men had tried to own. Elias sat in his chair on the porch as ashes, watching the sky turn red, his breathing shallow but steady. When the first star blinked through the smoke, he whispered her father's name, then closed his eyes. The wind carried the sound away, soft as prayer. Morning would find him cold, but at peace, and far to the west, a woman rode with the truth burning in her hands,